Hi, my name is Jennifer. I'm currently studying for the upcoming LSATs in October or December. I haven't really decided yet, but I'm aiming for the October test. Um, the reason why I'm hosting this is because one, I have no one to teach this stuff to. The reason I want to teach this LSAT stuff to, is because it helps me learn and memorize better when I'm teaching someone. So I thought that I would do this little presentation. Doing the presentation in and of itself is just doing something repetitive. So all of this will be locked in my mind, and the teaching is another way of do repeating repeating everything for me, so that way it really sinks into my long-term memory. So a thing about the LSATs, if you are currently studying for them, I suggest the best book ever is the Power Score Bibles. Okay, I have looked at the Kaplan book, and I have looked at the Cracking the LSATs and Master the LSATs, and while they're okay, the Power Score Bibles, there's the Logical Reasoning Bible, and then there's the Logic Games Bible. Go in depth. They go in. I'm talking about, like, they really go in. So if you took your practice test and you didn't do well, I suggest the logic. I suggest the Power Score Bibles. They give you a lot of background, a lot of foundation that I think the other books don't. Okay, so here's something about the LSATs. When you take the LSATs, with the logical reasoning, it'll have a little blurb. The little blurb will say, is the argument. That is what we're going to call the stimulus. Below that is the question. We call that the question stem. And then you have your 5 answer choices. Obviously, the answer choices. So when you hear me say the stimulus, I'm talking about that little blurb that you have to read. Now let's begin. Arguments. What are they? We have been in arguments. We have written persuasive papers, which are just arguments. And we've been doing this since our very first papers that we've had to write, probably in like middle school or something. And you hear about them on, TV with politicians arguing about, the debt ceiling and this and that. You hear about it from the pundits on TV, political columns, and so forth. Even if you have kids, your kids make arguments. Usually they want something, and they'll tell you why they want it and why they need it. It's our way of life, being a human. Okay, so arguments are defined as an attempt to persuade someone of something by giving reasons or evidence for accepting a particular conclusion. They are made of the following: a statement or judgment that follows from one or more reasons. For example, take this stupid sentence that I made up: I hate cats. They scratch and bite. Simple. I hate cats is obviously the conclusion. We know this because they scratch and bite is the cause for her hating the cats. Other thing with arguments are premises, or premises. And it's really just a fact, a proposition, or a statement that justifies the conclusion. For example, we have cheetahs are the fastest mammals on land. They can run up to 70 miles per hour. These are just facts. If there was a conclusion, these facts would be evidence that justifies that conclusion. A little quick note, that example is what we would call a fact set. On the LSAT, you will see fact sets and you will see arguments. Most of the fact sets will be inference questions / must be true questions and resolve the paradox questions, I believe. I think that's mostly what you'll see. I'm pretty sure about that. We'll get into all the different question types. Right now, we'll just lay in the groundwork. Assumptions. They are simply unstated premises. For example, because the San Antonio Spurs have the best offense in the NBA, they're going to win the championship. Well, there's the argument. What are we assuming? We are assuming that in order to win a championship, you need to have the best offense in the NBA. Simple. Assumptions. We make assumptions all the time. And they're so automatic, sometimes we don't even think about them. Think about when you go to a restaurant, the assumptions that you make. For example, you go to a restaurant, you're assuming that the cook knows what he's doing. You're assuming that the health department has come in and has given that restaurant, a good grade. You're assuming that the makers of your chairs put it together properly. You're assuming that the waiter knows the specials. We make assumptions every day. And so there could be millions of assumptions in an argument. Just remember that on the LSATs, a lot of questions will have you attack in some way the assumptions that the author of the stimulus makes. But we'll get into that as we get into the different question types on the test. Finding the premise and conclusion. It's really simple to find the premise and conclusion on the LSAT most times because there will be an indicator. Here's a list of your premise indicators. Here's a list of your conclusion indicators. It's very important that you memorize these lists. Any lists that I put up, memorize them. You want to be able to quickly read through something, find that premise, find that conclusion, because you're going to need to have that in order to answer the question. Now, before we move on, if there are no conclusion indicators, what you have to do is try to find the conclusion without them. And that can be a little tricky, and I'll explain how to do that in 1 minute. Complex arguments. They are complex arguments. They're just like simple arguments, like the I hate cats, blah, 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 except they add one more element. They add what is called a subsidiary conclusion. And a subsidiary conclusion acts as both the premise and a conclusion in the argument, making it complex. For example, because the Vikings have the best quarterback in football, They therefore have the best offense in football. Because they have the best offense in football, they will win the Super Bowl. No. A statement or judgment that follows from one or more reasons. For example, take this stupid sentence that I made up. I hate cats. They scratch and bite. Simple. I hate cats is obviously the conclusion. We know this because they scratch and bite is the cause for her hating the cats. Another Most arguments in the LSAT in some way will be based on the conclusion or the assumption. For weekend questions, you'll have to weaken the argument in some way. The best way to do that is by attacking the assumption. Same thing with strengthen, but in the opposite way. Flaw in reasoning, if you can find out what the assumptions are, if there are any flaws in that assumption, you'll be able to handle that question better. And of course, assumption questions, ask about assumption questions. Scope. What is it? If you've done any of the practice tests and you've looked over the answers and the answer was like, this answer choice is out of scope, and you're like, what the F? What does that mean? Very simple. Answer choices are out of scope if they introduce new topics not addressed in the stimulus and also aren't a result of combining ideas in the stimulus. It's out of scope. 2. If it addresses an issue that is greater than the quantity discussed in the stimulus, out of scope. What that means is if you have something that says, I love all pigeons. I love them all. Love them. And that's the overall conclusion. And then you have answer choice that says, well, she only likes some. Or she only likes some of them. Or something that she likes many of them or most of them. Something that is broader than what the stimulus is talking about. Then it's out of scope. And then you have ones where, for example, you'll have stimulus that say some or most, and then you'll have all of a sudden, well, none or all. Then it's, the opposite of number two. It's more specific than what is required by the stimulus. Indicators and the probability indicators, you definitely need to know these. Like I said, for scope reasons, because once you get a topic, once you get a stimulus, you read through that stimulus and you pick out all the quantity and probability indicators, you can quickly go through the answer choices and pick out the ones that are obviously either narrow or too broad than what is indicated in the stimulus. I think, and that's really all that there is to basic logical reasoning. Like I said, this is the foundation. This is just really something that has to become ingrained. It's something that you don't have to think of, that you're just going to have to do automatically, because there are a lot of, I guess, this is the foundation, and now we're going to start building the house. So next up, I'm going to talk about conditional, next up, I'm going to do main point questions, because it uses a lot of what we learned. And after that, we're going to go over conditional reasoning. And after that would be formal logic. And then we'll go over causality. And then we'll go over numbers and percentages, and then we'll go into the question stem. So I hope you enjoy. I hope this makes sense, and if I'm wrong with anything, shoot me a message.